It is June 19th, 2007, still. I am Sonic Sons, and for the first time I'm putting some manner of creative idea out on the internet, as I recently preluded. It's an idea from a video game called Shinobi Rises. I took that name, for one, from the old Shinobi series of video games, but you should know that Shinobi in Japanese is really just a synonym for ninja. So this is not really licensed, it's not canon, it's just saying like Ninja Rises, except Shinobi sounds cooler. So, bump the camera. For the first time, I will be reading off of a script. This is actually a letter I wrote to a family psychiatrist or psychologist or something like that, about 7 months ago or so, maybe more like that. And I happened to write out so much of my ideas for the game, I figure I'll just read this to you and then make another video later responding to questions, comments, etc. Now, this game, so you know, is really out there and different. Part of the reason I chose this as the first thing to express you wouldn't be able to steal it if you tried. This is really like theoretical, and if it doesn't sound really weird to you, that's because I haven't described it well enough. But it's not like a traditional game. So let's start reading. Dear Dr. So-and-so, as I mentioned once before, some of my ideas involve psychology, and so I thought it would be useful to get your input. Particularly, I have an idea for a psychology game of sorts that's specifically meant to make the player face his own emotions, learning to accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative. It's the fullest extent of what I call adaptive gameplay, the idea that the game should analyze the player's inputs not only to determine whether he wins or loses, but also to determine the player's emotional state, and that the game should change itself to better suit the player. As such, this game wouldn't have discrete winning and losing, nor a master list of tasks to accomplish. It would be continuous and ever-evolving, and the player would decide for himself when to start and stop playing, with advice from the game. Imagine that. A game that detects when you've been playing too much and encourages you to stop playing. That'd be interesting. It would be a completely new and wholesome experience. The name I've given this game is Shinobi Rises. Rises refers to the player attempting self-improvement, thus rising beyond his old self. Shinobi is another word for ninja, and there was a series of ninja games called Shinobi, Shinobi 2, etc. This name was chosen for several reasons. First, it's a tribute to an old series of games that I love. Secondly, while playing the games, I often find more inspiration for my psychology game. Finally, I think the premise of the game should put the player into the role of a ninja. This may seem strange, but there are reasons. For one thing, a psychology game cannot be billed as a psychology game, or else playing the game will be tantamount to admitting you have a problem. And side note, this isn't just for people with major problems. This is for everybody. Everybody. This is me, I'm not talking outside the letter, this is me trying to put my introspective side into a game, to encourage people to understand themselves. Back to the letter. A psychology game cannot be billed as a psychology game, or else playing the game will be tantamount to admitting that you have a problem. So I can't cast the player as a normal person in a psychiatrist's office, and I want to avoid normal-looking scenarios in any sense. I want to communicate emotions in a rather abstract, artful, non-technical sense, and for that I need an element of mysticism. Putting the player in the role quite unlike his own life will encourage him to develop a fresh perspective on himself, or herself. By choosing a ninja as the player's avatar, I do not mean to invoke the idea that ninjas are violent or cruel or underhanded or overly secretive, though these qualities were present in real-life ninjas. I mean to invoke the ideas of great self-discipline and self-understanding, of mystic connections to the greater powers of the universe. In other words, the positive side of the ninja legend. Ninjas are unburdened. They travel light and make use of whatever is necessary, whatever they find. A ninja need not ponder what his next action will be, because his spirit is so attuned that choosing the proper action is a habit more than a challenge. Ninjas flow. They move from one thing to the other without worry, and all their movements are linked together to serve the ninja's higher purpose. Ninjas are active in body, but calm in mind. The way forward is always clear to them. They are always aware of danger, yet they are never afraid, for they are introspective enough to know that fear is a worthless emotion. Ninjas have purpose, and yet they are free. Ninjas are independent and know how to make conclusions based on what they see rather than blind dogma. Sadness, anger, guilt, fear, and all other evils are absent, or relatively absent, and what remains is a wise, free lifestyle, and it is good. Of course, very little of the above applies to historical ninjas, who in fact often killed without regard to morality, and who probably suffered as many inner dilemmas as anyone else. But I think the myth of the ninja, as I've described it, does exist in the collective consciousness. Certainly, it resonates with me. The premise of the game is really just a mystical retelling of the real-life premise. In real life, the player has decided to play a video game, which has been created by a game developer hoping to help others deal with their inner struggles. The player plays the game, learns something, returns to interacting with the real world, and repeats the process as he sees fit. In the game story, Shinobi, the player, is meditating, and thus descends to a lower plane of reality, the game, which has been created by teacher, or sensei, as the case may be, which is really just me, or the developer, Shinobi stays in this realm, learns something of himself, and rises back to the real world, returning whenever he needs advice. As with all my projects, progress comes with random ideas on random parts of the game, so forgive me if my thoughts seem haphazard. Shinobi Rises will never take the place of real human counselors, but it can certainly help, particularly with everyday emotions which can be addressed in a generalized way, rather than, say, specific phobias. And so, at this point, I am, just zipping from one idea to the next. Each paragraph is something new. Shinobi Rises should never, ever ask the player anything, but should learn through silent observation and experimentation. If it asks the player, "Are you happy? Are you sad?" the player might very well lie, and in any case, it's going to throw off his connection with the game. But by analyzing his actions, the game can be far more accurate. In fact, the player should never communicate to the game through words, and instead he should use only actions. Note that the player probably will think of this as playing the game, rather than communicating with the game. He'll be given a large place to explore, probably a theoretical infinite area and infinite possibilities, and he'll act as he chooses in this environment. The game, adapting to his inputs, will detect his emotions and force him to confront himself. Or herself. Next paragraph. The game should play in traditional two-dimensional environment, such that both development and playing will be simplified, so as to encourage spending more time and energy on emotions. Another paragraph. The game will be completely full analog, i.e. things will not be measured discretely and everything will be more of a spectrum. For instance, rather than rate the player as happy or sad, the game should measure relative degrees of happiness or sadness, such that the player is always in the middle somewhere. Rather than rely on buttons, which only register on or off, the game should primarily rely on motion-sensitive controls. The new Nintendo Wii, for instance, has fully motion-sensitive controls. Because such controls relay many subtleties for the game to analyze. Internally, the game should not think of the player as having one of 10 possible emotions or anything like that, because real people experience subtleties. For instance, one might feel a nameless fear, together with a side emotion of guilt, a sense of confusion, and nonetheless some hope for the future. There will be no special attacks or combos or any of the sort or anything other to memorize. The player will be capable of near infinite activities, but these should be based on his own full analog input, rather than force the developers to develop a near infinite things the player might do and assign one input to each of these. Therefore, the player will be able to express his individuality and do things not even the developers have predicted or intended. The entire world of Shinobi Rises will be based on certain fundamental principles that also carry through into the player's movements. Thus the player will, theoretically, be able to attune himself with the environments and draw energy from the things around him, all in full analog fashion. And side note, that's a hard thing to really explain. In a sense, we can think of the literal physical things happening as one level of knowledge. Connection with the important parts of these leads the player and the game to extrapolate the deeper emotional levels of existence which govern these, and from this level extrapolate onward to even deeper truths, etc., etc.